were to unpick the sole reason for my career success, it's because I'm really good at asking men for money.
How many people have built a multi-million-pound business in their 20s, then another in their 30s, and another one in their 40s?
Kind of a one-trick pony, which is I build a thing and I sell a thing.
Before the fame and the OBEs, Debbie Wosskow was already building.
I've been in a lot of rooms asking for a lot of money from a lot of different people.
At 15, she won her first award from Young Enterprise for a scrunchy business.
I am always my company's lowest cost of sales.
Just 10 years later, at 25, she co-founded Mantra PR, which sold for millions in just 6 years.
You're always 2 client wins away from greatness and 2 client losses away from disaster, right?
By 35, already a seasoned entrepreneur, she took a flight with her family and saw The Holiday playing on board.
I watched the film The Holiday with Cameron Diaz playing behind my head.
Instead of relaxing, she turned the film into a reality, creating Love Home Swap, the world's #1 home swapping platform.
Hang on a minute. What? Why don't I know about that?
6 years later, Love Home Swap was sold to Wyndham for £53 million.
I've probably done it 2,000 times, Jimmy. You end up feeling like Jimmy Carr and needed some new material.
At 44, Debbie was ready to go again.
That's something like an arse, but like, why am I still at this in my 50s?
This time she founded Albright, a network designed to help women build businesses like hers.
I like to solve a problem that keeps me awake at night.
And who signed up? Ariana Huffington, Naomi Campbell, just to name a few.
I do have a shit list of people that when good things happen, I think that'll show them.
In today's episode, you'll get insights from one of Britain's leading entrepreneurs.
We're different people, we're different personality types. Some of us are more extroverted than others. Some of us have got different skill sets.
Debbie is here to share her guide on how to build a multi-million-pound business.
I'm on the board of Channel 4, I work with McKinsey.
No matter what your age is.
I know I want to go to a networking event with warm wine and canapes where I don't know anyone. You have got to show up.
Well, Debbie, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It is brilliant to have you here. As we were reminiscing beforehand, you were basically the first entrepreneur that I ever really met aged 23 and was also lucky to have a very small stake through MMC Ventures in your second venture at the time, Love Home Swap. But
yes.
Genuinely, I hadn't really sort of like come across a proper entrepreneur until that stage. And I guess it was basically the start of the London tech boom, right? 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
So much has changed in the intervening 12 years, but as we'll get onto with women and investing, some of it not even for the better.
Yeah.
Just give the listeners an idea of what you do at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I would say what's your job, but I know there's quite
a few jobs. I've got too many jobs in the context of Jimmy's jobs. So my 25-year arc as an entrepreneur has been that I've built and exited 3 businesses over the last 25 years, and I'm 50. I was 50 earlier this year. So my entrepreneurial life started age 25, which was young, and I think a brilliant time to start as an entrepreneur because I knew nothing about anything, had a lot of chutzpah and had nothing to lose. And I think starting when you're young is a brilliant time to get started because it formed for me my sort of life mantra, which gets me into trouble sometimes, which is what's the worst that could happen? And the answer at 25 is not a lot. So that has been what I have done. What I'm doing now is a few different things, and it's hard for me to not scratch my entrepreneurial itch. I mean, that's the one thing I know how to do. I'm kind of a one-trick pony, which is I build a thing and I sell a thing. So I exec chair a new business called the Better Menopause, which is a real passion project of mine. It's science-driven supplements for perimenopause, menopausal women. And it came about through, as do all my businesses, a real life story of mine. I'm a very, very simple unit in lots of ways, Jimmy, and that I need to have a moment of clarity or a moment of inspiration I think can come at any time. Yeah. And that's really been the story of Better Menopause because I got very unwell a couple of years ago and found out I was in perimenopause and went on this health journey, and that's how the business began. So I'm super passionate about that. Business is doing great. We've just raised some money. We're launching in the US the week after next, which I'm excited about. And I can't leave that kind of thing alone because I'm a problem solver, and if I see a problem, I want to solve it. But alongside that, I have some board roles. I'm on the board of Channel 4. I work with McKinsey. But my other big passion project, and hopefully all of this makes sense, is getting more female investors in the UK.
Yeah.
And we can talk a bit about why I think that's important. But the data around female entrepreneurs getting funded in the UK is worse than when I started out 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. And it's been on a pretty downward trajectory, such that at this year, in the first half of the year, for the first time in history, the amount of capital going to back a female entrepreneur in the UK went under 2%, which is a crap number anyway. So for that reason, I am the co-chair of something called the Invest in Women Task Force, which is a government appointment. And I'm working with our first female Chancellor of the Exchequer to create the biggest funding pot in the world to make the UK the best place in the world to be a female entrepreneur.
Why has it got worse?
It's a good question. So I'll give you the data. So in the first half of this year, 8 billion in venture capital was invested in the UK. And the amount of capital going to back an all-male founded team was 86% of that number. Same period in 2023, it was 80%. So it's got worse, depending on one's perspective, but as a woman, it's got worse. And the reason for that is complex. So on the other side of the table, only 11% of investors are female institutional investors, 14% of angel investors, and both of those statistics are getting worse. So women aren't at the table as check writers, and yet female investors are twice as likely to back a female entrepreneur as a man. If you look at the 2024 data, there's some underlying trends. So AI is a big trend, right? That's where a lot of big fundraisers during this year and last have been made. Only 7% of founders in the AI space are female. Some of it's sector. Also in 2024, more later stage rounds were invested. And if women don't write checks institutionally, they absolutely are not represented in funds that deploy capital post Series B and beyond. There's a missing middle, if you like. So my thesis, and the thesis of Hannah Bernard, who's my excellent co-chair of the task force, and Rachel Reeves, is that if we can create a funding pot to back more female GPs, in other words, more female investors, with a mandate to back women-led and mixed teams, and if women founded businesses at the same rate as men in the UK, that would add an extra 250 billion to UK PLC, right? And we know these kinds of stats, Jimmy. They're big stats and they're stats. But what is evidently the case is that we are not at the table. We're not at the table as founders, and we're not at the table as investors. And you've got to create incentive to change the conversation. And the incentive, I think, the bane of anyone's life, and we met, sort of halfway through my entrepreneurial journey, and you are on yours, and fundraising is a pain in the neck for anybody. Fundraising as a woman is unbelievably complex. If I were to unpick the sole reason for my career success being a standout, it's because I'm really good at asking men for money. Mm-hmm. And if I wasn't, I wouldn't have had a career, right? I have so rarely been in the room with a woman who can deploy capital. And I've been in a lot of rooms asking for a lot of money from a lot of different people. And that needs to change. So we need to create more female-run funds with a mandate to back women-led and mixed teams. I'm absolutely pro-men, and I'm pro-mixed co-founded teams. But I think fundraising is everybody's problem. Fundraising is the entrepreneur's nightmare. You're always fundraising. If you create a pool of capital that's there to back performance in women-led and mixed teams, I think what you'll also do is encourage men to find female co-founders. And that's part of the way that we change the conversation.
How do you get good at asking men for money, though? Let's look at what you've done well in the last sort of 15, 25 years. What has made you different and better at doing that than other women?
Well, I think part of it is about network. And I think that women's networks are generally not as good as men's. And I've prioritized network during my career. And I think women often don't. I think women frequently don't when they reach the stage when they're having families. Because it's really bloody hard, Jimmy. Mm-hmm. Nobody with a young child thinks, I want to go to a networking event with warm wine and canapes where I don't know anyone. That's exactly how I want to spend my evening, right? You have got to show up. And I've always shown up, even when I haven't wanted to, and often I haven't wanted to. And that's one of the things that really worries me about career trends and job trends post the pandemic is that the pandemic has been unkind to women's careers. So there's lots of brilliant things about flexible working and working from home. My worry is that all of the data shows that that is being taken up in the main by women and not men. And I worry about a world where women are not in the room. You've got to be in the room.
So the data's showing that women are spending more, like, it's great people can work from home now, but actually the person that ends up doing that in the relationship is the woman.
Yeah.
I
mean, think about it.
Yeah.
And that to me is a worry. And I spoke at a big conference last year, the Women in Work Summit, probably 400 women in the room. And I asked for a show of hands, going down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 day a week to how many days a week were women in the office. And 90% of hands went up for 1 day a week.
Yeah.
Right. And that worries me, Jimmy. So I think network is everything. I think clarity of ask and being ballsy is important. And I think there's so much data that shows that women do not ask in the same way as men.
Yeah.
I do. Right. I'm very clear on the ask, and I've always been clear on the ask. And I'm clear on telling an ambitious story. And I think one of my, if we're thinking about things I'm good at or superpowers, I'm good at storytelling. You know, my very, very early career was in PR and marketing. And I think that gave me, and people can be a bit snobby about that, I think it's a profession, that gave me real chops in how to tell a compelling story and how to sell. You know, I grew up around entrepreneurs. They would never have called themselves entrepreneurs because the businesses were pretty humble. But I'm used to people selling.
Yeah.
Right? I'm used to how you pitch. And I think that first business of mine, which was a PR and marketing agency, Mantra, was all about that. And also, those agency businesses are brilliant first businesses because you're always 2 client wins away from greatness and 2 client losses away from disaster, right? It's very precarious. So it teaches you a lot about P&L, but it teaches you about how to sell work. So to come back to your question, I think you have to be in the room. I think you have to have a compelling sales pitch. And I think you have to focus on the economics. So the thing about women-led businesses is that they deliver 35% better returns than male-led businesses. There are just less of them.
Yeah.
So I think I think there are men and men, right? I think you've got to find your male allies who I think admire the tenacity and the spirit. And then I think the final thing is, I'm always probably annoyingly Pollyanna-ish about life. You know, I'm very positive. Whatever happens, I can find the positive. I think as a woman, and for female entrepreneurs watching this, you will stand out. We're under 2%, so make the most of standing out.
I wanted to let you know that last week we launched Boxlight, a creative studio to tell the stories of British business. I believe that lots of companies are going to build their own media and content arms. We're taking all the lessons that we have learned from creating Jimmy's Jobs of the Future over the last 4 years and helping businesses create their own insightful content. Whether it's going to be attracting potential employees, drive sales, or even persuade government, I believe this will be the new form of communication. I think there's a growing appetite for long-form content. If you want to get in touch with the team to see how we can work with you, check out our website at boxlight.io. That's boxlight.io. Back to the show.
Right, make the most of the scarcity value and stand out and shape the ask around that.
It is, because I do remember that first meeting that we had, and two of the things that stick out now looking back on it all was partly the investing side of it. Like part of the reason I was with MMC was I was making decent money as a kind of political consultant, but still a long way from buying a London property. And I invested in stocks and shares ISAs, and I just felt so disconnected with the money, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, went off to JP Morgan Asia Fund 3 or whatever. You just got no idea what the money is. Whereas when, you know, investing like and meeting you guys and whatever, it was like, oh, amazing. Like I can follow the story and be much more closely aligned with it. But I also remember you saying at that meeting, like, you know, we've got a good story. That means that we get lots of coverage and so on. And that being a really like important point which kind of stuck, and you've kind of, that is much more common how you build a business now in the 2020s is that story, brand telling, etc. Whereas you were doing it 2009 was it you founded Love Home Swap?
2009. I am always my company's lowest cost of sales. Right? I'm free. and wind me up and put me in front of a camera or a journalist, and I'll do it. And I think the two things are very inextricably linked. So I'm a simple entrepreneur. I like to solve a problem that keeps me awake at night.
Yeah.
I am in constant admiration, particularly when I'm investing in deep tech, of founders that I meet where I think, how is that getting you out of bed? Because from my perspective, as the chief storyteller in any business that I've founded, like by the end of the arc of Love Home Swap, which was 5.5, 6 years, I was so sick of telling the story about my moment of inspiration on a plane where I watched the film The Holiday with Cameron Diaz playing behind my head. Like, I'd probably done it 2,000 times, Jimmy. You end up feeling like Jimmy Carr in need of some new material, right? So you've got to be in love with the idea at the beginning, because bloody hell, by the end, you're very over it. On the other hand, you are the chief advocate for your company's mission. So you better get good at it.
Yeah.
Be really clear on what that is. And if I look at the Better Menopause, right, I'm at it again, because there was a personal story there about my burnout. And I hate using those words because I feel they're very overused. But what happened to me 2 years ago, having always been very hard driving and got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, gone to the gym and flown, particularly for Albright, I got ill and I ended up in hospital with bacterial pneumonia and pleurisy. And when I got out of hospital and couldn't get any better and saw various doctors, one of the things that I was told was that I was in perimenopause, which I'd never heard of and felt very insulting.
And what is it?
Well, it basically means that I think the understanding now is that women's hormones changing in midlife happen way earlier than we thought.
Yeah.
Right, it's happening to you in your 40s. By 48, it was really happening to me. So my estrogen and progesterone and testosterone had sort of stopped existing, and that was partly why I felt so crap. But one of the main reasons for that was that I'd been on antibiotics for so long because I'd been sick that I'd totally destroyed my gut health. And that was why. And I was in there with the doctor, and he obviously thought I was a total nutter because I kind of got the laptop out and started. But I'm like, hang on a minute. What? Why don't I know about that? I consider myself pretty well informed.
Yeah.
And I'm only 2 phone calls away from someone who knows when I don't. So I've heard about the gut-brain continuum. I've heard about the Zoe app, heard about Tim Spector and Stephen Bartlett and all the blokes. Why don't I know that there's a connection between women's hormones and gut health? And what do I do about it?
Yeah.
And so the advice was, well, eat sauerkraut and, drink kefir and all that. But you need to find a proper probiotic to rebuild your gut health. And I was like, okay, what do I take? And it was like, well, there isn't really anything. And so that was the moment, because when I did a proper scan of, well, what is the gut health product that helps women in midlife? Because what you're saying to me is, unless I solve my gut, I can slap on as much HRT to my arms and legs as I like. It's not going to make a difference. Where is that thing? It didn't exist, because when you go into the shops, the ingredients in the probiotics were the same for kids as for women as for men. So there was nothing tailored. So then I went into me mode and found a supplements manufacturer and found Dr. Harper, who's one of the big menopause experts in the UK, and Joe Lyle, who's a menopause nutritionist, and put this team together, and we developed Better Gut. The brand is Better Menopause, which is the first probiotic for perimenopause, menopause. And then we were off because the product worked. It's a subscription. Women love it. It's totally changed my life. And then we developed Better Night, which is a sleep product. And we're soon launching Better Metabolism and Better Sex. And we're building a platform which is science-driven.
Yeah.
That supports women in midlife. And the reason that really matters to me is that I'm all about work and productivity and money. And you've heard me on this for a long time, Jimmy. Women need to talk about money. Yeah. Right? We need to get rich. We need to deploy our capital in backing other women. Otherwise, we don't change anything. And for me, the stat that was the killer was that 25% of women in midlife want to leave the workforce because of their menopause symptoms, which, by the way, in the UK, we didn't really start talking about till Davina McCall. I couldn't tell you anything about my mother's menopause at all. When I asked her about it, she just couldn't even really answer the questions. And it's one of the areas where the UK is ahead of the rest of the world, partly because of the NHS, the good old NHS, right? Because we now get HRT free on the NHS. So 50% of women who can do. The US, it's 5% because the healthcare system is completely different and they're behind. So from a business perspective, I'm like, okay, what's my why? Without sounding like an arse, but like, why am I still at this in my 50s?
Yeah.
And for me, it's about changing the conversation for women, money and work. I don't want women leaving the workforce in their 50s, 40s, where it's hard enough to have stayed in anyway after you having kids. I want them to be living their best work life and being economically productive. And the business that I want to be part of building in my 50s is one that supports those women. But also, I'm always about profit and purpose. I couldn't just be a not-for-profit person. I love the not-for-profit stuff I do. I'm on the board of the Women's Prize for Fiction. That makes sense to me because female writers undersell male writers 10x.
Yeah.
The gender pay gap in non-fiction writing is 38%. Right, so I can get out of bed for that and help them raise money and do the thing, but that couldn't be all I did. I go nuts. So I need to be part of something, because in the end, what really motivates me is looking at the KPIs every morning and checking the bank account, and it still does motivate me. So when I think about what's it like to do a few different things, I think you can make it work as long as they make sense together for me. And
there's a bit of a golden thread throughout them as well, right?
For me, there is. And I don't know if everybody's the same, but for me, the red thread is women.
Yeah.
Always has been. And the red thread is women and money and productivity. And this theme that I was brought up with, which is, if you can, you should.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes that's a burden because I can end up very overextended. But I feel like, to your point, I am good at storytelling. Most of the time, if I've got something to say, there'll be someone who wants to listen.
Yeah.
So if I can use that as a multiplier effect for a cause, which also ties to my business interests, then that's exciting for me.
Do you find the external pressure has gotten greater on you, though, over the last 10 years in particular, particularly with Albright and so on? You have become this real sort of like public champion of women and female entrepreneurship. Does that create its own sort of separate burden now?
I think that's a real privilege. And I feel, without sounding like I'm accepting my Oscar, I do feel like I'm lucky to have that. And for things like the Investing Women Task Force co-chair, if I can use that profile, such as it is, to drive change in an area that has not changed, that's both an honour and I should. If I can, I should, right? Yeah. I think where it can get difficult is, and Albright is a multiplier around this, I really want to help female entrepreneurs. I can't help all of them. I can't help all of them personally. Yeah. So I think that there's definitely a responsibility around having an open inbox that sometimes is quite hard to handle, because I could spend all of my week having cups of coffee with women who need help. Yeah. And that's why things like the task force and Albright, which I've now sold my stake in the business, but they're good places to channel. Yeah. Because you can't help everybody. And I've got quite disciplined about doing two things a week, 2 cups of coffee a week with people who need help, and not any more than that. Otherwise, Jess, my PA, wants to strangle me. So, some of that I think is important. Never read the comments. Yeah. I'd say this to my mum. People aren't very nice, Jimmy. And, they're just
people
not.
on the internet aren't very nice.
They're not very nice on the internet, it turns out. And I think that there'll always be something about a strong woman, maybe a strong, difficult woman, that people don't like, people who don't know you. Yeah. So when I do a piece, I did a piece in the Times about my burnout and better menopause. The comments were horrible, personal, horrible. And I think luckily for me, I've got pretty thick skin, because I think you couldn't have done what I've done and care, but it's still not very nice. And I think that when you talk to female entrepreneurs whose heads are above the parapet, particularly some of the amazing younger women who might not always, but a lot of them are in the wellness space, and they get a lot of really, really horrible trolling. Yeah. And I think when you get that, when you're really quite a serious, boring entrepreneur, mother, advisor, you're sometimes a bit astonished by it. So I always say to my mum, who gets quite upset by it, just don't read the comments, particularly not in the Mail. The Times actually is as bad. So I think you need to be ready for that and realistic about that. and you need to have your rhino hide on. You know, when Anna and I did the book, we did a book in 2020, believe Build Become had Supercharge Your Career, which I make about 6 pence from every copy that's sold, so it's not really a book plug, but we talk about that a lot, because I think as a woman, people will have a view about everything from your dress to your delivery, and I think you need to be ready for that.
And what advice do you give to younger female entrepreneurs who are doing it for the first time? Because when it's like you and you've been through the cycle a few times, you've got a bit more that you can kind of fall back on and so on. But when people are doing it for the first time, and like you say, it is easier now to do it in your 20s, etc. What's your advice to them?
Just start. I think don't overthink it too much at the beginning. So I say 3 things which sound really, really boring. And I say it to my kids, so they find it really boring. The first is get up early, which my kids really hate. But I think another part of the reason for my success is being an early riser, and all the data shows that, right? So just get up and get on with it, I think is 1. 2 is just start. You know, it's that famous Reid Hoffman, and I say it to my teams all the time, which is if you release a product that you're happy with, it's way too late, right? So you just got to get something out there and see what sticks. And I think the other thing is, and again, it's super trite, but I talk about the 3 Gs. You've probably heard me do that one before, but you know, the 3 Gs that I try to live life by are, number 1 is graft. We're both Northerners, you're a bit more Midlands than me, Jimmy. But you know, it's just a lot of work.
Life is,
and that isn't like hustle porn. It's just a lot of work. I work really hard, and I always have. And a lot of the reason for my success in my 20s was I just outworked everybody. Yeah. Right. So I think you shouldn't underestimate that. And I think you've got to be prepared for that. It's just volume. It's evenings. It's weekends. It's showing up. It's doing stuff. I've worked every Sunday for 25 years to get ahead of the week. And that doesn't change. So I think you need to be ready for that. The second G is grace. It's my daughter's name. I think that's a hard thing. I think I found that really hard sometimes. Grace under pressure, feeling gracious, you know, not holding a grudge. Sometimes that's really powerful. Like I do have a shit list of people that when the good things happen, I think that'll show them, right? I think you need the dark as well as the light. But I think being graceful and gracious stands you in good stead as you build a reputation over a long period of time. But the most important G is grit. And every bit of data shows that grit trumps genius every day of the week. There are people who are cleverer than me. You know, there are people out there with bigger, better ideas, but there are people out there who founded businesses that looked exactly the same as mine in every business I've ever done, actually. Oh, isn't that a bit like that? You know, you get it all the time. But you just got to be really gritty. And I think grit comes from resilience. It comes from routine. That's a big thing for me, which is even when the world is turning to shit around me, I get up, put my gym kit on, go to the gym, put my makeup on, put my heels on, I'm ready for the day. You know, you have to get yourself ready, and you've got to have the right people around you. So I've been super fortunate with business partners, one of whom is my brother, which was an amazing experience, although I know he's not willing to do it with me again. Anyway, and then Anna Jones, who was my Albright business partner, who's also my co-investor in Better Menopause. You've got to have people around you that make you laugh. You know, I think that dark humor has been the other aspect of my really strong relationships. I think for AJ and I doing Albright through the pandemic globally, working with talent, which is always its own nutty experience. I'm about to do it again with Better Menopause, launching with, you know, various celebrities in LA. I think having someone that you can have a gin and tonic and a laugh with at the end of it is really important. And I think that's why AJ and I, even though she now has a very grown-up job because she's the CEO of the Daily Telegraph, we still continue to do things together. Because I think once you've got that relationship with someone, it's kind of lonely on your own.
Building that social, cultural capital with it. I also remember another piece of advice that you gave, because you've always been quite health conscious. Like I remember a couple of times you saying that two of your kind of, well, you said sweat every day was an important part of it. Very. But also I remember just after I got the job at Number 10, we were out with James Bethel. Yes. And you said to me, just don't go out too much. Yeah. And it really stuck with me.
Nothing good happens after 11 at night. Yeah. That's what I always say about party conferences. It's
true. It's very true.
So I'm always the first to leave and I never say goodbye.
French exits.
Every time. Because I have to do stuff most evenings. And I've always been a single mum. And I've always gone home to see the kids. So I'm always there and everyone knows that I was there.
Yeah.
And then I just go. And I'm not a drinker.
Yeah.
I have the odd drink, but I'm not. I really prioritize not staying out late. Because I think when you're on the scene and you're doing startups, and we've lived during these interesting times where there's a crossover between startups and politics and policy and that whole world that we've kind of been born into over the last probably 14 years back to David Cameron's early days, it's possible to stay out late and get into trouble.
Yeah.
And I've just never been that person. I think do what you need to do and go home.
Yeah. It's a good mantra. But it's funny how it stuck with me. Why did you study theology at Oxford University?
Yeah.
And how does that correlate? Because that's not very sort of, doesn't fit the story so much.
Well, I'm a nerd, so it sort of does really.
Okay.
And I'm quite a thoughtful nerd, so I did philosophy and theology.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly in existential discovery. And actually, I love business, I love everything I do, but I love books and theatre. But books and theatre are really my very, very, very happy place. I go to the theatre once a week, I always have. And I'm a proper bookworm because I'm not a very good sleeper, so I read a lot. So, and I was a proper nerd at school.
Yeah.
And so asking the big questions has always been quite motivating for me. Asking the whys, whether that's about why do we behave the way we do, why does society, that's still part of how I think about things. I still read philosophy like a mega nerd. So I absolutely loved it. Unfortunately, my brain, I think, has stopped working that way because it's been so conditioned now to do 3 key messages in a PowerPoint. I don't know if I can kind of do it again now. But at the time, I wouldn't have studied anything else, and I absolutely loved it. And it was a massive privilege studying that with some of the great minds of our lifetime as a scrotty little 18-year-old who didn't know anything much. And I also find religion and why we believe totally fascinating. I'm from a Jewish family. I'm culturally Jewish, but not religious. I think I was taught by monks. I was taught by rabbis. It was an amazing experience. And I still find those big cultural questions totally fascinating.
But I've never really heard you talk about that much.
About
before.
why?
Yeah.
Or about it?
Yeah. Well, all of it, really.
Well, I suppose because mostly we talk about work.
Yeah.
And we don't tend to talk about people's inner lives in
No.
quite the same way. And I think that I think when people are in the world of work, that's what we want to talk to them about, right? So people want to know mostly from me, how do you do it and why do you do it and what happened? And I've ended up in a world of money.
Yeah.
And money is really important, but I also enjoy living in a world of thought. And actually, that kind of theatre bit, I've been on the board of a theatre and on the board of the women's, it has been pointed out to me that I don't need to try and run these things. I can just kind of go and trying to learn that lesson. But I think the privacy of thought, for me, is also a really important part of the mix, just as important as sweat every day.
Yeah.
And that, and my son is really into theatre, and it's the thing that we do together. And the moments in time of seeing the plays that have stuck with me forever and ever, the moments of everything, or the thing that I've seen last week, The Real Thing, or the Death of England trilogy, or, that's my moment in the week where I can't think about anything else because I'm totally in the moment. I don't have my phone. I'm just soaking up thinking and being and watching other people be brilliant. And I get a lot of energy from other people's brilliant minds and expertise. I mean, that does travel through to work because I love meeting clever people doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
But in my sort of artistic life, sounds really wanky because I'm totally untalented. It's not that I have any talent in that regard. But I think I love being around creative people who've got nothing to do with the day job. So I love hanging out with writers and theatre people. I love it. I could no more do that than I could, it's fascinating for me. But I think part of what's the point about the way you show up in the world, having built a little bit of profile and maybe a reason to have a network in a city where I've spent the last 30 years, it's meeting people who do amazing things that I could never do. That's super cool.
And you do sort of touch lots of different areas, right? You talk about the creative world there, you've been involved with politics and policy and business as well. What appeals to you about all of them?
Well, I'm quite restless. And I like new stuff and different stuff. And on a good day, I've got quite a good brain. And I like learning new stuff. I like the neuroplasticity. If I don't know anything about that, I want to learn about it. And I like being in the world. I really like that. I love London. I know that we're in the middle of a whole load of conversations about everybody leaving the UK for tax reasons, which we maybe shouldn't go into. But I love being here. And I think London's an amazing city and a difficult city. But if you're going to be here, make the most of it. And for me, making the most of it is that for whatever reason, my work life has allowed me the privilege of meeting really cool people who do different things. And that's one of life's great joys for me.
How have the markers of success changed for you over the 25 years?
Look, I like money under the bed. I always have had. And maybe that's to do with not, if I look back in my family life, we're only a few generations away from having no money. My grandparents had really, really humble businesses, and extended family worked on the markets, all that sort of classic immigrant stuff. So that matters. But I think getting a focus on my why has been a consequence of a few different things. I think doing a lot of therapy in my 40s was really important. Writing a book, in other words, official moments to be reflective. Is trying to understand better, why do I do this stuff? I think it was very unconscious in my 30s. I never asked myself why I did it, because you're just trying to get through, right?
Yeah.
Get the house, get the thing, deal with the kids, deal with life, have a buffer.
Yeah.
I think now it becomes much more consistent, and probably you want bigger train sets. I don't just mean, I was talking to a friend about this who I saw yesterday, who runs a very big business and has gone from a smaller business to a medium-sized business. But I haven't really done that in quite the same way. Anna now is back running the Daily Telegraph, and that's a big train set. She likes that. For me, I think it's about impact and wanting to do things that really count, which isn't, sort of, legacy is a very wanky word, isn't it? It's not really that. But I think it's back to this: if you can, you should, and being given permission to do bigger things for me is interesting. And that's what I'm trying to do. I think that I would like to say that I'm in a bigger category of women doing it than I was 25 years ago, but I don't think I am. And actually, if I look at my girlfriends who we've had on the show, Jimmy, or who who are exited female entrepreneurs, it's kind of the same group of people that I've always known, right? So there are some amazing young women coming through that I'm lucky enough to have invested in: Grace Beverley or Hannah Chapette at Hyber, or the founders of Fair HQ. Some of these businesses that are great, but there still aren't enough of us. And so one of the big points for me as an angel investor, as a task force chair, with the work that I'm doing with women in midlife, is to try and get more women doing it.
And what are the common traits amongst those young entrepreneurs that you spot?
Well, they're all quite different. And I think that's quite important to remember about female founders, that we're not all the same. And if I look at some of the exited female founders that are friends, whether that's Alex DePledge or Martha Lane Fox or Tamara Lohan or Vivian Wong from Little Means, we are all quite different. We're different people, we're different personality types. Some of us are more extroverted than others. Some of us have got different skill sets. Some of us have been CTOs. Some of us are great salespeople, I think. But I think for all of us, it's harder.
Yeah.
It's just harder. And that's a lot of what we talk about, is that it's harder because women in the main have more of the mental load than men. And not all of those women have children, but a lot of them do. Yeah. And that period in time is super tough. So I think the personal is the professional for female entrepreneurs, but we're all facing many of the same challenges around raising capital, around scaling businesses, And that's all very top line stuff. But mostly what I talk to them about is the real shit that I perhaps wouldn't talk to a man about.
Yeah. When it comes to like the mental load, has technology made it worse or better?
Oh, I think worse. Because you're always on. And you can always be reached. And look, I'm a terrible proponent of this. If someone hasn't replied to me within an hour, I think they've died. You know, like so I think it makes it more challenging. And I think our expectations around workload, around what founders can deliver. On the other hand, the positive point of that, I think, is I'm building out the better menopause relative to building out Albright. And I have a girlfriend who's pregnant at the moment and about to give birth. And we're used to Zoom.
Yeah.
And we were not used to Zoom before the pandemic. So I think being in the room still matters. And my lesson to women is always you have to be in the room. But I think we're much more used to building businesses virtually than we were before the pandemic.
And on your sort of love of creative people and so on, how have you found being a non-exec at Channel 4?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's totally fascinating. And it's not my sector, right?
Yeah.
So I'm learning about lots of different things to do with telly and broadcasting and people, amazingly creative people, making incredible content. I mean, I had a board meeting this week. We've just come off the back of the Paralympics. I mean, how cool was that?
Yeah.
It's amazing. And Channel 4 equals the Paralympics. It really does. So I think back to this point around being part of things that really matter. I think TV really matters. I think British TV really matters. I think its ability to shine a light on things that matter is really relevant. And I think if we cease to protect that, that's at our peril as a country. So I absolutely love it. And it's a totally different muscle because I'm not operating the business and I never will be.
Yeah.
Learning how to be useful when it's out of sector is sort of important. But I think recognizing that you are useful and that your experiences outside of the sector are relevant is a whole different learning experience. But I love it. I love every single board meeting where we watch the show reels. It's just so cool. So yeah, I think it's really fun.
And what made you think, like, how do you get a job like that in terms of what makes you think, yes, I'm going to go for it?
Well, I've never worried about going for things, Jimmy.
No.
I'm all in. So I just think, oh, sod it. I might as well, because what's the worst that can happen? I don't get it. I've been for things and they haven't happened. I just don't have any shame around that. Yeah. I think it's fine. But I know we don't. But we don't quote Woody Allen anymore for all the obvious. But 90% of success is showing up. Yeah. I think you've got to show up for stuff. And I think part of what does happen with age, and in this world of going a bit more plural, I think you learn, back to your point, to tell your story in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And so actually for something like Channel 4, where there's a process, an application process, it does force you to go, okay, I've never worked in TV. I'm never going to produce a TV show. But here are all the other things that I have done that I know about that would be relevant. And when you write your cover letter, you're kind of figuring it out. And when you put through, an Ofcom interview process, which you are, you figure it out.
What was that like, going through the Ofcom interview process?
Fun. Big room.
Lots of people.
Yeah.
If you were to pass the mic, I mean, you mentioned a couple of younger entrepreneurs earlier, but if you were to pass the mic, who else should we get on the show? Who's doing interesting things?
Oh, on the investing side, I definitely talk to Bryn Kennedy.
Yeah.
She's building a fund called Smart Society Ventures. She's one of the only women in climate tech. It's totally fascinating, incredibly important sector where actually Europe has a real responsibility to show up and isn't quite yet. So I would definitely talk to Bryn, and I think she is very interesting. And I think what we're seeing more now in Europe is founders turned investors, which is what 60% of investors in the US are, and about 5% in the UK. And that's her story. So I think she is totally great. Hannah Chapette, who's got a business called Hyber, which is about student accommodation. She pitched at one of the Albright pitch days, and I sort of stalked her afterwards. She's just unbelievably impressive. I think listening to her story about how she's using her digital platform to completely shake up that space, which is vital, is really interesting.
Brilliant. And what is the most what's your favourite play, and what's a play that's had the most impact in the last year on you?
I think it's really hard to see anything better than the Lehman trilogy, and maybe that's because it feels personal, because it's a story of Russian immigrant Jews. It's completely fantastic. Sam Mendes at his best, and it's back in London soon. Giant, which is on at the moment. It feels like there's a real anti-Semitism theme, but about Roald Dahl at the Royal Court's absolutely amazing. And the Death of England trilogy, Roy Williams's plays at Soho Plays, which I think is still on, was really amazingly thought-provoking about race and class in the UK, very British, the three of them. They're 90 minutes each. I mean, I could go on, Jimmy, so this is kind of my thing. But I find all theatre transformational, without sounding like an idiot. But you go in there and you're in this sort of sensory bubble and you're watching people perform. It's unbelievably powerful for me. And it's part of the balance of kind of taking you out of your life. And also, to the nerdy me, it's part of you recognizing your own sort of insignificance. And I do find it really helpful at a time when we can all take ourselves pretty seriously. We can all take our work a little bit too seriously. And I think a reminder that there's more out there and life's rich tapestry is important.
So a very strong headline in the Times about you having a heart attack, which almost gave me a heart attack.
Don't worry, I didn't have a heart attack. So it was an interesting one, Jimmy, because it's the story behind the Better Menopause, which is the new business that I exec chair. And I really thought carefully about telling the story and whether I wanted to, because I find burnout as a term a little bit cringy and what's it really mean, but I felt it was important to own it. And what happened to me really was years of overwork. You know, I've always really been hard driving, whether that's getting up early or training or working hard. And off the back of a long period of time of flying to the US and back, I ended up in hospital. Thought I was having a heart attack. I wasn't. But I had bacterial pneumonia and pleurisy. I was super poorly and I couldn't even walk to the end of the road when I came out. You know, it was really, didn't recognise myself. And these moments are often wake-up calls. For me, it was a wake-up call about needing to change up my work life, but also was the beginning of what became the Better Menopause, because a good entrepreneur never lets crisis go to waste, right? So what happened afterwards was, when I was trying to get better, saw lots of different doctors, had lots of tests, and one of the diagnoses that came out was that I was in perimenopause, which I didn't understand, never really heard of, but basically meant it was the beginning of my menopause. And part of the reason that the symptoms were so bad is that my gut health had been really compromised by being on antibiotics for so long in an outside hospital. And for that reason, my menopause symptoms were worse. And I just never heard of it. Haven't really heard of perimenopause, vaguely. Certainly didn't know that there was any connection at all between gut health and women's hormones. Had heard about gut health, the gut-brain continuum, you know, Tim Spector, the Zoe App, Stephen Bartlett. Like, I'd heard it, but frankly, Jimmy, they were all men. Yeah. And nobody had been talking to me about the connection between gut health and women's health. And also what I had seen with my founder business hat on was the growth of conversations around perimenopause and menopause. So that was the kind of my equivalent of the love home swap watching the film The Holiday. You know, the Better Menopause story was a genuine kind of health crisis, looking for a solution, couldn't find it, so I founded the company. And the business now is science-driven supplements that we develop with a range of different doctors to solve the issues that women in midlife find themselves in, so that they can feel like you again is the strapline. And I think it's kind of my strapline a bit, because for quite a long time I didn't really feel like myself. Felt quite diminished actually in lots of different ways. And I think founding a business for me with a team of women to ensure that women don't feel like that at a time when 25% of women want to leave the workforce in midlife because they feel so crap, that's just wrong. So if I have any business mission for this kind of next second act, it's making sure that I can change the conversation for women in midlife and make them feel like themselves again.
Terrific. That's great. Brilliant. All of it.